What is up, guys? Happy Wednesday. Kind of a fun episode. Non-photographer coming on, Joe Cavazos out of Texas, who is just an incredible designer, art director. He's designed everything from church programs to K-Swiss ads for the shoes that Gary Vaynerchuk sells. All kinds of really cool, intense projects. His Instagram is one of my top 5 inspirational artists that I follow. So I've loved his work for a long time. We've crossed paths kind of in the church circles, media circles, and I just knew years ago that I'd have to connect with him somehow, and this podcast is the way to do it. So I don't want to talk anymore. I want to let Joe do the talking about his story, his passions, his inspiration, and even some of the gear. If you're a designer, why does Joe design in this program or that program, or what's he do to help keep that inspiration up? So if you're a designer, welcome to the Beer to Talk podcast. I'm Adam Mason, and it's really, really cool to have you here. If you are inspired or want to start your own business, I would encourage you just to subscribe to the podcast. It's free, of course, in the player that you're listening to. And every week we're putting out content just like this with awesome entrepreneurs, people who have taken their passions full time. Now, that's something you're interested in. I would encourage you to listen, and eventually you'll learn to love it. So without any further ado, here's my good buddy, Joe Cavazos. Joe, I'm super excited to have you on, man. It's been a long time coming, man. I've been a big fan for a few years, and it's just been so. I just want to say this: it's been so awesome to watch you. It'll never be enough, but I feel like recently, the past few years, you've gotten more of the attention that I felt you've always deserved, man. So it's such a pleasure to have you on, man.
Hey, thanks so much, Adam, for having me. It's such an honor.
Yeah, man, I love it. And you can't see us if you're listening, but we both have on black fitted hats, so we're in a good club today. So I love it, man. But dude, so your kind of background, at least from the outside looking in, it's kind of in the church, the nonprofit world, art direction, designing. I'm sure that you've been both the intern getting yelled at and like the guy helping push the interns into a better place. Like, give me some of your background as far as really diving into design and creativity and art direction, starting out, and then what does that look like now, for you?
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Like you said, most of the work I've done has been for churches and nonprofits. I grew up a minister's kid, so my dad was a pastor. So I kind of grew up in that realm for a long time. And at a young age, like in high school, really got into art. And my teacher really taught me about not just art, but like commercial art. And my whole thing was like, I wanted to make money somehow, but I never knew how to connect the dots of like, art being an actual commercial thing that I could pursue. So I just quickly fell in love with Photoshop and design, and and slowly just began kind of heading towards that direction. And at the same time as I went for school for it, like I'm also working behind the scenes at my dad's church and the churches that I was attending. And a lot of times you need like they don't have the funds or the right people, so it was a great a place that I could learn and kind of just do stuff. And from creating flyers to, just creating graphics and stuff like that for the church, which is a great way to kind of take the stuff that I was learning at school and actually like practicing it.
Yeah.
And so over the years, like, I kind of like, backstory, like I didn't want to be kind of in the church world, even when my dad, that I had my years of like, oh, I don't want to follow the footsteps of my, be in ministry and all that. Because I always thought like in order to be a minister, you got to be a pastor or something like, super spiritual.
Yeah.
But it just kind of, my career kind of went full circle. I went to school, started working at some other jobs, and just kept gravitating back to the nonprofit and church world. Later on, I got a job at a church full-time, doing like more creative direction type role. And then later on worked for a couple companies that created content specifically for churches. And then I just went on my own freelance. And now I'm at a point where I'm doing a little bit less freelance and actually focusing on my own business in still within the church space, but helping, and graphic, but more on the business side of things and not so much client work. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. It's a continual story.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about, the difference between, you mentioned like freelance and running your own business. For a lot of us as like solo creators, at least on our side, that feels like one and the same, right? Freelancing almost feels like not as official, but like, I'm still a freelancer at some level, right? Like I'll work for whoever. What does that look like for you though? Are you building out like an agency, or what does that look like?
Well, I got to the point where I was trying to decide, like, okay, how do I scale my business as a freelancer? And to be honest, like the thing I love creating, the thing I struggle the most is that client to client interaction. Even though I have been successful, at least what I think, business wise, dealing with clients and things like that, it was always never kind of like my cup of tea. And so even though I'm still like freelancing is business, but I guess the difference is now I'm focusing in some companies that are more like customer, like building products versus, where we have a customer base instead of that client, one-on-one client to client interaction. So that's kind of a little bit of the difference. And where I've been transitioning over this last year is doing less client work. I'm still doing some client work, but not as much, and focusing in on some of the businesses that I've built, a couple with them with a friend of mine.
That's awesome. That's really cool. That's really, really cool. I know one of my favorite things that I saw you on Instagram create, and I think we talked maybe a year or two ago, about like, I just encourage you to put yourself out there even more, like start a YouTube channel, like go for it. Like what, since then, it seems like the biggest thing I've seen, or at least one of the most exciting things, was I'm a big Gary Vaynerchuk fan, and then you got to, I guess, partner with them on one of your signature techniques called the pixel stretch. What was that like? Working with K-Swiss, Gary Vaynerchuk, like what was that whole process? And is that still, I assume he's going to put out more shoes, is that relationship still ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of just a quick, that project was working with K-Swiss more primarily. Like I didn't know what the project they had, and it just happened. It's one of those things where the stars just align right at the right time. Their one of their head of their social media team is the one that reached out to me, and our paths kind of crossed at the same time as that whole pixel stretch was kind of blowing up, and they were releasing that shoe. And so it was really more the media team. So like Gary and his team, like they have a separate treatment, and then K-Swiss has their own social media. And so they were looking for other options, as far as like basically creating content for social.
Yeah.
And so Omar, I forget his last name, he reached out to me, and he's like, hey, what would it look like? And it was a quick turnaround thing. And, I've been a fan of Gary Vee and, the things he's been doing. So it was really cool to make that connection and just be a part of that. So turned out real cool. Potentially there might be some stuff later on, but, that was more one of those things that it just happened to cross, the paths at the right time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty honored and excited to be part of that.
That's cool. That's awesome. What has been one of those things that, as you transitioned out of like the corporate / church world, nonprofit world, where for people who don't know, like, you're making, new graphics almost every week, or new treatments almost every week for different sermons, different outlines, all that kind of stuff, different promotions, right? Like, what does the transition look like as far as workload? And when did it feel comfortable for you to transition out of that and go, full-time freelance, or like full-time for yourself?
Yeah. I think it got to the point where, I was trying to, so I was doing it, I was working with the company, but then I was also doing freelance, and freelance is always this thing that I enjoyed. And, aside from the financial aspect of having extra income, I always enjoy kind of, doing different things and trying out different things. And a lot of times, when you're in a setting, either a corporate setting or a specific in-house design team, those, you don't get to exercise those different freedoms a lot of times. And so for me, but then it got to the point where freelance was growing so much where I had to decide, okay, it's either that or like never sleep again, So it got to the point like 6 years ago where I finally realized like, okay, financially it makes sense, to pursue freelance. And so that it took me kind of a year of kind of almost a burnout where I was like, I can't really, I either have to give up freelance or, go all in on one or the other. And ultimately, going freelance, one, and enjoying that side of thing of just being able to make my own schedule, being able, to spend more time with my family,
Yeah.
Has been a huge blessing. So I don't regret one bit of it. So now it's been 6 years since I've been, on my own.
That's awesome, man. I love it. That's I've been freelance probably about like 5 or 6 years as well, and it's not 100% easier by any means. You're almost like you went from doing one thing 90% of your day, and now that thing that we both hunger for, like for me it's working with people, photographing them, or documenting what needs to happen. For you it might be actual designing or working on treatments, and you end up working on that like not as much as you would normally like to. You're like, oh, I have to do taxes, or I have to do marketing, or I have to do, I have to post or email, of course, right? Like it's just, you're always diving deep in the inbox and you're like, man, this is not what I went to school for. This is not what I'm passionate about. So I get that, man. I get that. But like you said, the freedoms, right? Like family time, or maybe, you're in charge of your destiny at some level, which is nice, and it takes some time to figure that out, of course. What's now, since being freelance in the past 6 years or so, like what's maybe one of the biggest surprises, or one of the biggest things you've learned? Was that figuring out income? Because I know for designers, similar to photographers, right? It's like, gig to gig, unless you really get like a big retainer or you get a yearly contract or something like that. So what's some of the, something you've learned along the way?
I mean, the biggest thing has been like, figuring out cycles, seasons, I guess. And after the first couple of years, it all kind of became seasonal, where I knew like, okay, summertime, there's a dip for me, whereas like, I mean, if you're doing wedding photography, that's your main thing.
Yeah.
For me, anytime between, after like Easter time to summer was a big thing, especially like, working with, churches and nonprofits. That's kind of where, things slow down a bit. So adjusting with that financially. And that's why, I actually started some of these side businesses on top of the freelancing I was doing to help supplement some of that income. And so I think the biggest thing I learned is like, okay, there's those designers that are like the top 5, top 10 for like a certain thing. I knew I have enough self-awareness that I'm not like in that space where, I'm Joe Cavazos and I could only do this special type treatment or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be sought after that. Like I knew kind of where my strengths and weaknesses are, and realizing that and knowing that, okay, it's better for me to kind of, not just rely on freelance, but also like, what are these other businesses that I could take the same skill sets, things that I'm using to help build other people's businesses and other people's dreams. And like, how can I use some of those same skill sets to either make my own products, develop my own, or other businesses that are more, that are not, dependent on the seasons and things like that. And so over the years, that's something that slowly developed, and, 6 years in has, now giving me the luxury where, I'm able to select the type of projects that I'm able to be a part of, and I really enjoy being, but I still have income from these other businesses that are starting to kind of thrive on their own.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Especially with the seasons kind of stuff like that. I feel like that's a big thing too, is like there's times when you get like, a bunch of checks all at once, right? Or a bunch of direct deposits, and you're like, yes, this is great. Like, honey, let's go out for dinner, or like, oh, we can, pay the rent or whatever. And then you might have 8 weeks, or especially in the gig world, it's like net 30 or net 90, like payout times. And then, by day 89 or day 29, you're like, where's the money coming from? So, like I've been there before. It's like, oh gosh, like it's so extreme, at first if you're not used to it. And then what's your, just out of curiosity, and you don't have to say numbers by any means. I always like knowing people's like methodologies. So for you, like what was how did you smooth that out? Were you better at saving eventually, or did you say like, okay, this is what my wife and my family need for our monthly income, this is what we'll put away? Like how does Joe handle that, as far as like
as far as or for the seasons, or
exactly, like
going into freelance,
just handling seasons financially?
You know, I wish I was a lot more well thought out when it comes to the business aspect of it. My wife helps me out tremendously, and that's the huge part, and probably has been our saving grace more than my getting the work, is because she's been able to handle a lot of the finances, and so she's kind of my gatekeeper. Was like, okay, we got to slow down, like, spending, or she's been able to kind of take that burden.
Yeah.
And for me, it's really been more focused on the actual work. So that's where she's come in like huge, as far as like, okay, we know, but going into it, like the summer months, we would save up. So we knew summer would be slower. So that's also the time we'd be traveling and probably spending more. So we would spend, the first quarter, not, spending a little bit less and trying to save a little bit more. So that way we have that freedom, when summer rolled around. And so that's kind of been the thing, but it's been mainly her doing with, her being able to take that and just run with it, and being able to help calibrate me, because when it comes to the numbers, and that's something I learned in the beginning. It was really a challenge for me to handle a lot of the business aspect and still have room to do a lot of the creating. And so, that's when we decided, like, first year, and it's like, okay, she's going to handle all the finances. That way I could just focus on the creative stuff. So
yeah, no, totally. I mean, that's
been huge.
That's important. I feel like a lot of some of the photographers we've had on here who are not in the wedding world, but more in the commercial or editorial, like, I asked them about what's it like to have a business manager or a rep, or just somebody that can kind of you can play off of, right, ideas, finances, that can manage that stuff. Having somebody who's in your corner, who supports you, but like telling you, hey, let's slow down our spending, or like let's if we wait now, it'll be better later, or whatever. So that's crucial, man. That's super crucial. I was just always curious, because like people want to know, designers want to know, like, how do I manage everything or whatever. So one question for you, kind of going back to the church world, man, like, what's one thing, you grew up in the church, right? And then worked for other churches, some pretty big ones as well. Like, what is one thing the church gets wrong about art and creatives, and then what is something the church gets right about art and creatives?
I think the thing they get maybe wrong the most is how art has to be this super consumer based thing, or like, I don't know. It's just, I find I walk the line of designer and artist a lot of times, and for some cases, those things are two separate things, and a lot of times, it's sometimes churches just think of design or art as a service-based thing, or like, we're getting this thing, this, but I think a lot of times churches maybe miss the opportunity of actually using art for art's sake, within the church space. And that's where, I think a lot of churches maybe could do a little bit better job of embracing the arts. And the thing is, it's like, it's hard to embrace the arts a lot of times for churches, because they can't really put a ribbon bow on it and make it, perfect. Whereas design as a service is like, okay, well, this is what we need and this is what we're getting.
Yeah.
And so I found that there are some churches, and that's where I've kind of been too, myself personally. So I understand the struggle of, okay, are you hiring me as an artist? Or are you hiring me as a designer? Being able to kind of swap from those two roles has been something that I've just, been accustomed to. But I know some churches that kind of, they're not used to that world of, hiring art for art's sake, or, commissioning art versus, having just this service, this design service. But I would say this, that a lot of churches are coming around to it. And so, when I started back in the day, like, 10 years ago, working for churches, like, it was unheard of to have anybody on staff or full time that was a graphic designer. And now, I mean, it's like, if you're a church, you don't have a graphic designer, like, it's really hard to find a church that doesn't have somebody, whether to volunteer. And so I think they've begun to embrace that and begun to embrace people like me. For example, when I was a kid, I'm super thankful, like, at my dad's church and other churches that I was at, they allowed me to make mistakes. I mean, I wasn't good at all. And so, they allow me to make stuff, because that's all they didn't really have a lot of options.
Sure.
But I see now churches are embracing the arts and design. And not only that, they're like, there's people that, are artists and designers, but, maybe they're working another job because they haven't been able to fulfill their creative dreams or whatever. And I've seen some churches where they've stepped up and kind of help, bring people under their wing and give them a place to design and a place to create, and now those people have gone on to start their own businesses, be their own creative entrepreneurs. And so it's been cool to see that churches are also now becoming a place where, designers and creatives can flourish and grow and, go on to do other things if they want to.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's like churches, I think now overall, and nonprofits too, right? Like, and just in general, I work for a lot of charities, that, one of my charities I worked for 5-6 years ago, they didn't have any, principal photography. They just had, kind of iPhone photos, whatever they took along their trips or whatever for marketing. We connected, we did work together. And at the beginning too, it was a big risk for them to, fly me out or whatever and make that happen. But after the photos were delivered and they started implementing it into their marketing, that year, their donorship went up 700%. Like they had a huge increase. And it's like and obviously I cannot guarantee that for every charity by any means, but it's design and photography and just visual communications and stuff and social media even, right? Like, that's how the generation communicates, and at the same time, people think it's just a young kid thing, but like all of our parents are on Facebook too, so it's like over the last 10 years, there's been people that, nonprofits and churches that have been ahead, nonprofits and church that have been at pace. And then now, ironically, I feel like with COVID, you saw so many tiny churches out of the woodwork being like, hey, we're on Facebook Live, or hey, we're going live on Zoom, or hey, we're going to try and figure this out. And I think the cool part is kind of like you said, like it really can be. I know for me, I only worked at a church for 2 years, but what I learned a lot of that time was like, communication, setting expectations, client services, right? Because at least how we did it, like every ministry could kind of come to us and pull from us. And so it'd be like, okay, yeah, I'm working with kids team this week, or, oh, I'm working for our head pastor this week, so the caliber or the attention to detail, not that you wouldn't want to do it with everything, like, okay, I need to be really on for this thing. It was a safer place to do that. But at the same time, every weekend, you're guaranteed an audience, better or for worse, that's going to see your video, see your artwork, see your stuff. And, man, at least in DC, where I feel like everybody's so smart and everybody's nerdy, everybody has attention to detail, like everybody's very particular, you're going to get emails, like, hey, like what was up with that video, or hey, what was up with that thing there? And like some of the people that went to church with us were like producers for like CNN and NPR, and so like they recognized quality. And so luckily though, kind of like you were saying, if nonprofits and churches can make artwork and media and that kind of stuff part of the culture, to where it doesn't have to be like the bow and put a ribbon and a bow on it, like we talked about, where it is like where it's just obvious, right? Like it'd be like and not that they are the standard. I know some designers are really antithetical to Apple, but like it's obvious that Apple does care about design, whether it's good or bad. It's obvious they care about it, right? It's like one of those things where they're going to pursue that. And nonprofits and churches, like if it's obvious where you care about it, like Charity Water, it's obvious they care about storytelling, right? And then other organizations like Gary Vaynerchuk, right? The dude loves social media and communication, and like visual arts. So anyway, yeah, I love that. That's kind of there's been like an ebb and flow for you, but yeah, it's one of those things that I know 10 years ago, yeah, it was like the church had half a media guy. You'd be like, oh, you lead worship and you do some slides, and then now, luckily churches are like, oh, if this is our, digital version of a communicator that we need. So that's really important, man.
Yes, absolutely.
Tell me one of my favorite places. So your art is everywhere, but I love just like every day on your Instagram, I feel like you're putting out something awesome. Is that, is your consistency and just making stuff for yourself, is that still something important to you? And then how have you gotten in the rhythm of, doing this for years and practicing art for fun, right? Like that's what I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, like Pixel Stretch originally was like trying something new. Like how is that kind of how do you keep it up for yourself personally?
I mean, to me, it's one of those things where, it's something I always go back to. I think about when I first started out, like in high school, and my teacher, Mr. Troxel, opened up, showed me Photoshop, and I just like going back to that feeling of learning something new or doing something, just for the fun of it, because that's all it was at the beginning. Like, when I was in high school, I had my eyes set on going to engineering school. But it wasn't until, I took those first art classes and started messing around with Photoshop that I was like, okay, like this is what I really want to do. And so I'm always chasing that. Like, I love client work. I love being able to do these business stuff. But I feel like, like I still need to, keep like, I don't want to be somebody that's played out, after so many years, and so for me, just for me personally, I like to go back to playing, and it always comes down to that, and I have seasons where like I'll go long stretches of not doing anything. Like right now, since COVID hit, everything's kind of been weird.
Yeah.
I just haven't, done a lot, but, I just always go back to like, okay, this is, what I like enjoy doing. And for me, like even recording the process, that's been something beneficial for me, because I also not always the best at remembering things. And, I can always go back and, look, oh, this is how I made this, 6 months ago or 8 months ago. But over the last couple of years, I've just seen it be super beneficial, from getting me new work to learning new things. Like the benefits of creating for myself have just like, they come back 10 times fold. Whether it's licensing artwork that I've created in the past or getting new gigs in the future, I could always point it back and to the artwork that I created for myself. And so, yeah, it's something I enjoy doing. And, when I get in those ruts, when I get, like right now, this is one of those things where I've been thinking about, okay, I need to get back into it, because, when I'm in my best is when I'm creating out of that flow, and then everything else just kind of trickles down from that.
Yeah, dude, the world needs more Joe Cavazos work right now, bro. The world is out there needing it. I want to know, and every designer is different, but like your work is like, it's a mixture. I like it because I'm like, okay, I can see, what kind of looks like, photos used or something that looks, essentially like real life, but then it's like, it's turned on its head in such a new creative way and ways. And then like some of my favorite stuff was like the Cybertruck, right? Like the two cars with no wheels or anything like that. I love that stuff. That's like where I'm like, oh, this is just it feels like an original piece, like you're making this art piece, right? Or like, I love the very bold, like, obviously I'm a big fan of the color black, but like, the black with the flowers, right? Like, and again, at wedding guys, we see flowers all the time. So we're like, oh, whatever, flowers. But we're like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is something I'm thinking about. What are some of your inspirations, early on? And then like right now, I know it's hard with, family, running a business, but, how do we make time for inspiration? But what are some of those things that like you go to look for to find new ideas or to try something new?
I mean, inspiration's always varies for me. A lot of photography, painting, painters and stuff, like I like to flip things. It's kind of what I think of, especially like photographs like these. Like there's some photographs that are just beautiful, and it's like, okay, I don't want to mess with that. But then there's some like, okay, I always have the idea of like, I see something visually, and like it just like a light bulb hits, and it's like, okay, how can I make this different? How can I bring something new to the table? But I get my inspiration from everywhere, from music to, even like I follow a lot of photographers and cinema people, just on color treatment, things like that. So there's always these little pieces from everywhere. I look at some artists, how they use paint and how they use composition and things like that, and try to bring some of those things where it's just a mix. And I feel like I'm just kind of like a visual DJ in a sense, where I'm just, remixing some things, but making it fresh, making it different. And that's always kind of my, I guess my signature recipe is like, okay, how can I take, different pieces, whether it's, my aesthetics or, pieces from another photograph and coming up with new things. But to me, like, as much as I love creating, like the challenge of it is really what I enjoy the most, the challenge of, coming up with new ideas. And I say this, I try to say this without sounding like too high on myself, but it's like, we have the power to make our own inspiration, like to create, from within, like, the inspiration, the stuff out, there's stuff out there that's already been made. And, some stuff can be replicated, but it's like, always add your like signature to it. Like, how can I add my, footprint to this, or, take an idea that I've seen somewhere else, and, how can I make it my own? And so I'm always thinking that's always a challenge for me. It's like, how do I go about flipping things to making it look unique and different?
No, I love that, man. It's one of those things that like there's an intentionality to what you're doing. Like, you're not just going willy nilly, if you will, or like, I know for a lot of people, including photographers like myself, once you start making money at it, it's really hard to want to do it for free. It's really hard to want to do it for fun, but it's like that practice or that permission. Like, a buddy of mine recommended this book, and I think it was called like the Play of Art or something like that. I'll text it to you, but it's like, cool. Just the permission to get weird, to like just totally say, okay, I have these rules and these things I like, these Adam Mason signatures or these Joe Cavazos signature things that we do. Okay, I need to make something that breaks all of those, or I need to make something that breaks one of them or whatever, and just like have the freedom to create again. That, like, again, years ago when you're, messing around with Photoshop or InDesign or whatever. And for me, you're first touching a camera, and every photographer shoots the same stuff, like leaves or grass, or concrete or, a pretty lady or whatever. Like, that freedom to just be like, the result doesn't have to intrinsically have value, or at least monetary value. Right. Like, for you, it's the idea of like the practice. And so, that's one thing I've always loved about you, is just like sharing, you like most artists, you share what you're working on if you're allowed, like, hey, I checked out this thing I did, or hey, this is cool. Or like the NDA, lifts up and you're like, hey, I can share this. And then, but you're also like, still making for you, which I just really applaud. I think that's really, really cool, man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
And aside of that, I mean, even like early on in my career when I was going freelance, I wanted to get the word out as far as the work that I'm doing so I could get more work. So, like you said, sometimes you're working on these projects and they take, 2 months, 3 months. So by the time you can share anything about it, it's like, okay, one post out of, 6 months worth of no posts. And so for me, this is also just, again, it's just another benefit of being able to create just for fun, because it helped me, at the same time, grow an audience, and, get more eyes on my work, which potentially led to more work. And so it was just another way to, market without, being super markety, I guess. I don't know what the word for that is, but, just getting more eyes on my work to open up more opportunities. And so that's just another benefit of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the unspoken thing, kind of like we talked about the Gary Vee example and K-Swiss, like, K-Swiss, somebody found you or somebody had their eye on you, right? Or somebody, I always say that like connections are one thing, but like having the work is another. But when they meet, if your work is good and the connection's good, then it's like where it blossoms and blows up, and
absolutely,
it's like for you, they might have found the tip of the iceberg, and then you see the rest of the iceberg and it's still awesome. You're like, oh yeah, like even Joe's like first post on Instagram, still really good, or whatever. Like the body of work is just as good as the singular piece that brought them over. I think it's one of the things. Do you know Jeremy Cower, or know of him at least?
Yeah, I know of him.
Yeah. So he, that's one of my favorite things about him over the past 2 years, is watching him transition from like darling editorial Taylor Swift style photography, which is still cool, right? Like he photographed lots of cool stuff, to really, like people love to watch artists be themselves. And like, he's one of those people the last 2 or 3 years has really, one, through personal work, like just started getting weird or exercising his creative muscles. And now it's kind of flipped again. Like people are reaching out to him for that, kind of quirky, weird, crazy work. Which I think too, the ultimate goal is like fulfillment. Like, okay, I'm making money at the work that I want to create, and people are letting me be Joe or Jeremy or Adam. Like they're letting me be me, and I get to make awesome stuff. And so, people don't realize like the other side of it, the business side. People are attracted to busy places, man. Like that pop-in restaurant, you want to see a restaurant and you be like, it doesn't need to have a line, but it needs to be like 80% pop-in and be like, babe, we got to go there. We got to go. People like to see busy, it shows, it's like social proof that you're worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man, he's definitely a goat. Somebody inspires me. Just that aspect of being able to kind of reinvent what you're doing,
Yeah.
and a lot of people maybe get content where they're at. I was like, oh, I got X amount of client, and for me, like, there's this little discontent of like always not necessarily wanting more, but just knowing that within me there's bigger dreams and there's bigger goals, and trying to like change that. Like I told my wife, like just talking about it last night. It's like I'm gonna be I want to die like 90 something and still with Photoshop in my hand or something. Like I don't see myself like, okay, I'm going to be done with this. And so, in order to do that, like you have to learn and grow. Like you can't just be stuck in one place. And, I think now as I get older, and as I have more responsibilities, it gets tougher, but it's even more of a reason to like, okay, like, focus, make that time, and, because that's really where a lot of the growth happens, at least for me. That's where I've seen a lot of the growth happen when I've been able to spend that time to go back to playing, and making that a priority.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's like, yeah, I picture you being 90 with like Photoshop on this magical like holographic iPad or something like that someday. Like, have you tried, speaking of which, technical wise for designers listening, have you tried Photoshop on the iPad? Have you messed with it at all?
I did for a little bit, but my my 3-year-old took over my iPad, so I need to get a new one so I could play with it. Yeah, I tried a little bit. I just always gravitate back to the machine because I guess I'm just old dog, old tricks. It's really hard to get back to using that. I did play with it. My 8-year-old daughter, she loves it, and she's actually been doing some compositing work on there.
Wow.
I've showed her a couple things, and she's already taken off with it, so she loves it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to those things getting a little bit more powerful, where it doesn't feel so much of a strain, coming from the machine to iPad.
Yeah. What is, talking about your tools for a little bit, my impression, I started using Photoshop in high school, which is now probably like 11 or 12 years ago. Again, just messing around, having fun, taking the art teacher's direction, whatever. But then so many other people, designers I know and I've interviewed and worked with at churches and stuff like that, they might do everything in InDesign, or now I feel like there's been a lot of competitors that people have started to use outside of Adobe apps. What does that look like for you? Or do you still, everything's in Photoshop, maybe it's just more vector than usual, or what's that look like for you?
I still, depending on the tool, like, 10 years ago, 6 years ago, I was doing a lot more layout work and stuff like that, where, it called for more like, InDesign and Illustrator. But now most of my work is either like cover art, more illustrative work, even, and I wouldn't say illustrative like drawing or like vector, but more editorial design. And all that stuff for me it just works better in Photoshop.
Yeah.
For my style and for the things I'm creating. So I've noticed myself gravitate more to those. I still use those other tools when needed, but like, for example, this year, like I kind of pulled back from doing, I used to do a lot of branding, logo work. So like, when I started focusing more on my side businesses, that was one of the first type of projects to kind of take off my list. And so like find myself doing a lot less, InDesign, a lot less Illustrator, and really just creating artwork. And for me, my tool has always kind of been Photoshop is what like got me into the design game. And it's always been kind of my bread and butter. Yeah. So I feel the most comfortable there. Along the way, I've tried some other tools and here and there, but I always tend to come back. So
no, I love that. I love that. People always want to know, and I think like you see, even on the photographer side, you see competitors come out to maybe the main software you use, or what or what you feel comfortable with, or like on the photo side, what the photography side, at least digitally, it's only ever been like Adobe Bridge, Photoshop, and then Lightroom, which are still all Adobe. Like we do not have a lot of options for non-destructive photo editing, and Apple used to have Aperture. They killed that. And then there's a few other programs that I think like are slowly getting up there, but it's going to be interesting. I'm curious to see like what the future will play out in the next 10 years, which at least for us, you still plan on designing at least for 10 years. I still plan on shooting, but like how will things be handled, and at least on our side, I feel like Lightroom and Adobe is like not doing a great job. So like it doesn't look good, So I'm always like, okay, what competitors are out there? Are there any? Can they handle? And like for our work, we shoot about 250,000 photos per year. So I'm like, what software can handle this? Those kind of batch vibes. And it's hard, it's weird, but you love this tool. Like it's where you feel most comfortable, right? Like Photoshop, if that's where you feel comfortable, and Photoshop does so much nowadays, right? Like I feel like there are people that do use animation or make GIFs out of it. There's people like you. I use it for my uses. Whereas like watching you, I'd be like, oh, I don't even know these features are around in Photoshop, right? Like vice versa. You'd be like, oh, that's how Adam retouches something, or oh, that's how we use the high pass filter to do sharpening. You're like, oh, I don't even think about that. But it's, yeah, I don't know. All I'm saying is that I don't think carpenters worry about their hammers as much as we worry about our software. What's Adobe going to do, or what's Apple going to do?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just a tool. I mean, and that's why I think a lot of people maybe get hung up on tools. I mean, actually, right now, I've been speaking to tools. I've been looking into getting some camera gear and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, this has been an 8-month long process, and I still haven't ordered anything yet. But it's just that there's so much, there's so many options, there's so many routes, and even with design, back when I went into college, like graphic designers, and this will date me, but like 1998 when I graduated high school. It was like commercial art, graphic artist, like graphic designer, like that was it. But now you have so many types of designers. Like, you have designers that when they come to product designers, they specifically working on apps and app development. Those guys, they could use other software like, Figma or, I don't even know what's out there. I'm just throwing stuff out there.
Right.
They could use these other, third-party tools or other things like that. But, I'm so used to Photoshop, for what my purpose, the type of artwork and the type of work that I do. Like it's, it's still, for in the most part, the files that I'm handing over to my clients and things like that, they're wanting them still in Photoshop. So as long as I'm still able to produce and work, I'll probably stick around there. I'm always have my ear to the ground of other stuff that's out there, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I wish Photoshop would do, like actually run smooth. But stuff like that. Over the years, it does. I just keep coming back to it, and it's hard to let go of that.
Yeah, totally, man. It's been awesome. I have one last question for you, kind of pertaining to all this. What is one, piece of advice, or what do you feel is the most like valuable thing you've learned that you would tell, other designers, entrepreneurs, people who want to work for themselves in this design world? What would be your advice for them?
I think the biggest advice is to never stop being a student, and never to stop learning. I think there was a part of my career where I got to points like, oh man, I got this figured out. Like, but then just realizing that I don't. And the moment that you get complacent with like, okay, I got this figured out. Like that's the moment where, things become stagnant and, it just stops growing and stops. So like, we're never too old or never too young to learn. And so I always take opportunities to learn, whether, that's from people that are older than you, younger than you. Right now, like, man, I'm inspired by a lot of the young designers and artists, people like you that are just, out there creating. Like to me, like it gives me life. I might be, a few years ahead, but, it's the kind of stuff that inspires me. So always, that I would say this is like always be a student, never get tired of learning. That's super important.
I love it, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for being on. Where's the best place for people to go find you, say hi, check out your stuff? And is there anything you got going on this year that you're excited about that people can, help out in?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can go to my site, joecavazos.com. I'm more active on Instagram, at Joe Cavazos. And I got a couple of things started, right now. This year I started this new company called newsupply.co, which is kind of like an asset-based, deal where we feature 3 contributors. If you're a designer or a visual artist, like, you'll get 3 different, art packs or assets every month. So that's something new. I started a few months back and really excited to partner with a lot of other designers and creatives to get that together. So that's a pretty cool resource that would love people to check out if they got time.
Dude, I love it, man. I've seen on your site too, even you still sell, like textures and different things like that in different formats. So it's really cool. It's like something where it's just a leg up, or like you mentioned, like the assets. I know you're a big fan of Unsplash, but a lot of designers are like, okay, I want to make something, but I need a cool photo, or I need something, or I want to bring in something that I wasn't expecting, and like those assets are really important. So, dude, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it, and we'll send everybody to your Instagram to say hi and say what's up, man.
Hey, thanks so much, Adam.
Man, I've been wanting to have Joe on the podcast for years, it feels like. He influenced my life, my design, my church background, working for a nonprofit in a church early on. I want to say years ago, when there was just a big creative community on Twitter and Instagram, and I've just been a big fan. He's awesome, and it's so great to see him get the success that I feel like he deserves, because he's the man. He's just so good. He's head and shoulders above every designer I could ever think of. So love him. Check his stuff out. Joe Cavazos on Instagram. We'll link it in the show notes, of course. And guys, thank you so much for being here. Keep being awesome.